Now, this session is about the Middle East. I don't need to tell you what has happened in the Middle East over the last 2 years. And I think it is almost common sense to say that what was called the Arab Spring has been truly the reshaping of a whole region, the remapping of a whole region in terms of politics, in terms of psychology, in terms of economic prospects, in terms of the way the region sees itself with respect to the outside world. Should we say that the Arab Spring was the spring of democracy in this part of the world? I think at this stage, the answer has to be, at best, maybe, because we don't know in one form, if one form of authoritarian dictatorship regimes are not in the process or are not in danger of being replaced by other forms of authoritarian / dictatorship regimes. What we know for sure is that business as usual in the region is absolutely over. Great forces have been unleashed, new expectations have been created, new realities are emerging, and so the region is in flux, and not only it is in flux, but I think for the next 10 years, let us be optimistic, for the next 10 years, the two key operating words for the Middle East and Arab world will be uncertainty and volatility. And this is a reality we should learn to live with, because quite simply, this part of the world is too important to be ignored. To try to decipher the new realities that are beginning to emerge, I think we have three great people on stage. First of all, let me introduce to you Shafeeq Ghabra. Shafeeq is one of the most prominent intellectual analysts in the Arab world and from the Arab world. In addition to that, there is a particular note because Shafeeq is a very dear friend of mine, and we are accomplices in crime because 8 years ago we created together the Global Strategy Group Middle East, which meets every year and which brings together a remarkable group, and we learn a lot from it, let us be honest. They learn, but we learn. So, and Shafeeq has also a remarkable background, and I can say that today, in many circles in the Middle East, he is a star. He is really a star. Now your blog is what, 50,000 people following your blog, something like that? Almost? Okay. Last time it was 40,000, and it was less than a month ago. Then, if I turn to the next person to my left, it is Miss Ambassador Lambah, who is a special envoy of the Prime Minister of India. And Ambassador Lambah will be very important for our discussion because it helps us to understand also what are the kind of concerns, what is the kind of perspective that a country which is so close to the Arab world, to the Middle East, how do they see that from their perspective, and how do they assess the risks. And then another fascinating person, it is Cengiz Çandar, who is from Turkey, who is a journalist at Radikal newspaper, who is a former war correspondent. And can I mention the background? Go ahead. Yes? And who is a former member or trainee or whatever we call it of a PLO. So he knows a number of realities from the inside. And as a former war correspondent, on many issues, he doesn't speak from books, he doesn't speak from other articles he has read, he speaks from life experience. So let me, without further ado, turn to you, Shafeeq. And I would like you to answer two questions. If you look at what has happened now for 27 months or 28 months, what are, in your view, the 4 or 5 key changes that have begun to reshape the region? And second question, which is very important, what is the impact or what is happening or what will happen with respect to the monarchies in the region? Because let us not forget, some of these monarchies are the owners of a crucial part of strategic energy reserves in the world. So let us try to address these two questions. I give you 10 minutes, because otherwise he can speak until tomorrow morning about the region, and then we will get to a next question with the panels. Please, Shafeeq.
Okay, well, thank you, Claude, and it's a pleasure to be in India for the first time ever in my life. So happy to be here and to be in an amazing country and culture. So let me take the first question. What happened in the last 2 years was basically a sudden transformation and a sudden collapse of the walls of fear that surrounded the Arab populations and the Arab peoples in different various countries. It started in Tunisia, but then it moved, as you all know, to Egypt and to Libya, and to Syria, and to Yemen, and to Bahrain, and to other places. And in every place, it took a different nature. But the underpinning of all of this had to do with the existence of a long-standing dictatorship, authoritarian regimes. Yet these authoritarian regimes did not bring about a better life, did not bring about a larger middle class. On the contrary, middle classes were shrinking, corruption was on the rise, doubling and quadrupling, and leaders were thinking about their very narrow interests and how to pass the rule to an immediate son, as happened in Syria, and as was almost going to happen in Egypt, among other places, as well as in Libya and Yemen. And so all of this, with high levels of repression, created resistance, created counter-conduct, created alternative options for people, which is low intensity in the beginning of civil unrest, demonstrations, protests, making a web page, saying no. I mean, that took, so if you go back to the history, things did not just happen in 2010 and 2011. You study what happened in Egypt, it goes back to 2003 and 4 and 5, where things were slowly evolving, and the regime promised reform, but revolutions happen after failed reforms. So it happened in 2010 in Tunisia and in 2011 in Egypt. So that's the background overall of the change of paradigm. In the older paradigm, the rulers were saying, you have to accept whatever we give you. After all, if we go, you will all lose. And if we go, the extremists, radical Islamists, are the ones that are going to come and control your life. And they're going to be worse than me. So accept me, the worst, than living with the extreme worst. And somewhat, something changed in the mindset of the peoples of the Arab world and decided they don't want to live under that paradigm and they want to challenge it. So who challenged it? It was the youth. And there was a role for technology. It opened up the space. It allowed people to communicate in ways that were not exactly controlled by the regime's apparatus and institutions of security. Overall, it is youth. It is a generational change of relationship. It is a new paradigm. It is, if not calling it the Arab Spring, which is a debatable word, it is a great Arab transformation, but it is the beginning of an Arab transformation that will take a long time to mature. So this is a beginning of people testing. Now, one phenomenon out of all of this was that these reflections and these expressions had a peaceful mindset, something that everybody learns from India and everybody learns from Gandhi and from Jean Shah, but that's at the core of it. Even in Syria, where there is a military now confrontation between the Liberation Army on the one hand, the Syrian Free Army on the one hand, and the official army, still these youth leagues that control much of the street keep going to demonstrations that are peaceful and calling for the downfall of the regime and the change of the regime. In Egypt, in Tunisia, I mean, in Yemen, it is an armed population that led a peaceful expression of rebellion. So overall, this is different than the 70s. In the 70s, there was a belief in the armed struggle. In 2011, people resort to arms if necessary, if they had to. But the belief is stronger in peaceful protest because there is a sense of understanding that that, in a way, will have an impact on the kind of society you would want to build afterwards. Now, first stage of the elections in Tunisia, in Egypt, in other places, ends up normally having the Islamists come to power. But that's maybe one of the best things that has happened, because the Islamists were never tested, actually, and their thinking, and their ideology, and their approaches, and the Sharia is the solution, has not been tested. And now within 6, 7, 8 months, that has created quite a dynamic. Many Islamists have left the Muslim Brothers and created new groups that are more open and more democratic in their essential part of thinking. Many of the Muslim Brothers are facing challenges that will end up changing their mindset. There is a dynamic going on. As long as you don't have one party controlling the entire scene, as happened in Iran after the revolution, the dynamic goes on, and there is a civil group way outside the regime protesting, and there is a regime up there trying to manage, and it discovers it cannot manage without the civil group. We'll end up with some sort of a compromise that may help this transitional era. So we're just in the beginning of an era, rather than the end of an era, and in a way, this is an educational period, and Islam could mature out of this interchange between human rights, civil liberties, democratic thinking, and Islamic traditional thinking. There is quite a dynamic going on that I definitely think is highly important in the history of the region. Now, to take this to the Gulf and to the monarchies, I would say the monarchies overall have a, relatively speaking, better legitimacy than the republics. These are historical reasons that has to do with state and tribe and family in the region. However, the monarchies also have authoritarian systems and are challenged at this point with what to do next. Now, the most challenged immediately, you've had several ones. Morocco, the demonstrations in Morocco were as big as the demonstrations in Tunisia. But the king of Morocco was able to make a constitutional changes, to present a roadmap, and to accept a elected government. The Islamists came to form the government, led by Ben Kiran as prime minister. So in a way, the king presented a roadmap but it was like a 50-50 situation. So this will work maybe for 4 years, maybe for 6 years, but it has to be further amended toward a constitutional monarchy, but more a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, where you have a parliament that produced a group of political parties after a competitive election that forms a government, and then the king can come and say, I will go ahead and ask the prime minister from the majority party, as happens everywhere. I think that is the drive, that is the direction in the monarchies, and it takes different shapes. So in Morocco, it's the case that took a step, I would say, a step forward. In Jordan, it's stagnating. There was a quarter of a step, but the security is still. The groups that do not want to see reform are large and strong, and the population is changing, and the bases of the regime are slowly shaking. 2 years, 3 years from now, after Syria, there will be impact, and the king will have to go through serious reform, or else there will be a much more radicalized population at his hand. You go to Bahrain, a huge rebellion. It also wanted a constitutional, parliamentary constitutional monarchy, but there was repression, and there was a GCC intervention. But the political problem did not go away. It's still Bahrain is divided, still the government cannot govern, still the population is in a state of anger and frustration, and that dynamic still expresses itself and finds many outlets. And now they're talking about dialogue, but they didn't yet agree on anything. You go to Kuwait, also. You had a mass movement in 2011. Its slogan was to bring down the prime minister. Finally, the emir gave in after seeing 60,000 out of 1.2 million, the population of Kuwait in the streets. So that happened. But yet there was another. We've had like six governments, 7 governments in 6 years, several parliaments. I mean, so there is a crisis over a constitutional parliamentary monarchy, and still over rights, and over expansion of opinion, and over Twitter, and over so many issues. But people are now bolder, are expressing themselves more. So there is a grassroots movement going on in Kuwait. Even in Saudi Arabia, I mean, people now go to the jail and stand in front of it, the families, and ask for the individuals who've been jailed, and ask for their release, and then they are, I mean, there is a dynamic. People want the rule of law, but at the same time want representation and expression, want rights, want not to be jailed for stating an opinion publicly, regardless who that person is, looking at a more egalitarian society in the context of all the issues. So the GCC countries, as well as the monarchies, are under the same pressure, but yet the dynamic in the monarchies is still not change of regime, and the movements in the monarchies happen to have the nature of reform movements, seeking to expand the horizon of sharing power and with the monarch, and definitely to minimize the power of the monarch and the power of the ruling families and their ability to change policy overnight. So this is a democratization process that one sees, despite that there is a lot of resistance to such ideas and such movements. So we're at the beginning of all of this. So again, I look at this as a whole as an Arab transformation, and sometimes I've called it the second Arab independence, believing that the first Arab independence was against the foreign national, the foreign powers, Britain and France and others, and so it was all these liberation struggles against colonialism. But this second independence is an attempt to redraw and to reshape the relationship between people and government, people and ruling elites, in such a way that is in favor of people becoming the source of legitimacy.
Thank you, Shafeeq. We will get back to some of the points that you have raised in the discussion, and I will have, and I guess our friends will have some questions for you. But before we get into that, I would like to turn to Ambassador Lambah, because, as I mentioned, of course, what is happening in this part of the world has tremendous economic, strategic, political implication. And I would like to ask you, Ambassador Lambah, how do you look at the external impact of what is happening in the Arab world? How do you see how what is happening in the Arab world has to be put in the context of what you see also in Pakistan, what you see about Iran, what we see about Afghanistan. So it creates, I would say, we might say, a more uncertain and even more potentially dangerous neighborhood, if I can put it that way. Ambassador.
Thank you. Well, I have one advantage, that I am sandwiched between two experts. So the view that you'll get is from, and both experts and a moderator born in Tunisia. So you have a wealth of experience on the region. You'll get the views from me from an outsider as an expert, but not outsider as a country, because India has close links with the region, and I'll start with that. Why is it important for us, this area? One, it's our extended immediate neighborhood. Two, it is vital for our energy security. Three, naturally it follows, we have geostrategic interest in the region. Four, it is the largest economic partner we have, over $160 billion per annum, and we have 6 million expatriates in the region, and our remittances are over $65 billion.
65?
Over $65 billion every year.
Billion.
Yeah. Having said that, before I come to, I'll just give you a brief of what we feel the situation from here. You know, for 4 decades, there had been a static, and when a static region suddenly changes take place within a year, it's bound to have problems. These are unprecedented, but in our view, not reversible. You know, Islam is not the primary move here, but the movement is led by Islamist parties in all the places, most of them. Again, the main constraints have been domestic. The aspirations have been domestic aspirations which are being raised. And what follows is that foreign intervention or foreign influence is both unwelcome and unhelpful. So the speed with which the things would move would depend on interplay of domestic forces within the region. The important developments that we see, I think one I would say is the competition, which at times is becoming confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. That will play an important role and is playing an important role. Second is the role of Iran and the impact of the Shia population, whether it is in Saudi Arabia or in Bahrain. Three, I think we have to keep in mind the resurgence of a potential Iraq and what the impact that it will have on the developments there. And we cannot underestimate the role of Turkey, which is playing an important role in the region. So what is happening is the emergence of political Islam, and I think that has to be engaged, because the alternative is a radical Islam. So that is, to my mind, a very crucial issue. One other point that I like to, I was hearing with great interest what Mr. Ghabra was just saying about the peaceful nature. What we find here is that it's very difficult to put one single straight jacket as to what happened. What I see here is that one could describe the developments in Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia as non-violent, developments in Bahrain and Yemen as semi-violent, and those in Syria and Libya as violent. And I think with these remarks, I would conclude my initial statement.
Okay, we will also come back to some point, but then I would like to turn to Cengiz, Çandar, because, and Ambassador, you alluded to that, many people have said, in fact, what these Arab world countries should now or are aspiring to is, in a way, to emulate the model of Islam secularism as, in a way, exemplified by Turkey. So this is a first question I would like to raise with you, whether this kind of assumption or this kind of possibility, does it really exist? The second question, maybe more immediate, is of course for a country like Turkey, but not only for Turkey, the tremendous risks of violence, war, spreading beyond the confines of a region, because Syria is on the verge of disintegration, as an example. We know that the events in Iraq have created also a new problematic with respect to the Kurd issue. And we can multiply this kind of example. So I would like you to address maybe these two questions, whether we can have the possibility of a Turkey model, if you want, in some of the countries of the region, and then the issue of the risk of spreading of the violence and uncertainties that we see in the Arab world.
Well, I think the title, The Reshaping of the Middle East, Deciphering a Chaotic Transition, is a very challenging one. And I recall, I can't recall actually how many meetings I have been participating over 2 years, either on the same title or synonymous titles, but I always ended up, rather than deciphering a chaotic transition, adding more chaos into the mindset. So at the end of the day, we will come to the conclusion, Claude, that you summarize in your introduction that what we have as certainty in the region is uncertainty for the foreseeable future and volatility. So coming back from what you already summarized for the foreseeable future of the region, and just presenting the questions that you already presented, I need to make a reference to what I heard yesterday from Ambassador Sibel, former Foreign Secretary of India, when he raised the question, rightfully, whether this has to be called as Arab Spring, that he has suspicions to call this phenomenon as Arab Spring. Actually, it's a very American media jargon, this Arab Spring, because especially when we look at the developments, particularly the ones in Syria very recently, we don't see anything blossoming in terms of the spring. And the American media, looking at the, taking note of the relatively peaceful transition in Tunisia than in Egypt, created this term, Arab Spring. And in Libya, it was not that much a spring sort of development. Then in Yemen and Bahrain, it's quite muddy. And in Syria, it's very messy and bloody. And then they start to talk about Arab winter. What we are, the American media or the Western media in general likes to define things with climactic adjectives like velvet revolution, orange revolution, in Lebanon, the Cedar revolution. I was in Lebanon and I heard from nobody calling it Cedar revolution. And wherever I've been to the Arab world, and everywhere actually, before, during, and after the developments that was unleashed at the end of the year 2010, nobody called it a spring or summer or fall or whatever. it's not climactic. It is a historical epoch that we are witnessing. And what the Arabs in their own languages, the ones who are involved in all these developments, either call it the revolution per se, or in a milder way, Arab uprisings, or the intellectuals like Shafeeq, although he didn't call it as such, Arab enlightenment, Arab awakening. So it's not a spring at all. But from there, again, if I refer to what, as a suspicion he had in his mind, Ambassador Sibel had, and I think the qualification he made is shared by very many people all around the world, that what we see is the advent of Islamism. So what is the consequence of Arab Spring or Arab Revolution? We see around the emergence of Islamist forces taking the lead and the rules. So should we get worried? Well, there is, of course, emergence and political Islam in motion, whether it was in Tunisia or in Egypt, and now in Syria even, contesting the existing regimes. And then we asked to question, looking for a consolation, whether Turkey could be a role model for them. Well, Turkey actually is having a success story in the economic sense, a stable rule of a party who is triumphant in every election and looks so for the foreseeable future, at least for a decade to come. And that party has very strong Islamist credentials and acting in a secular country. So as long as Turkey can present itself as if not a role model, but at least an example to be emulated by the rest of the Arab world, so far so good. But I think this is a very Orientalist outlook, searching for role models and just trying to console oneself that it is not bad Islam, it is an acceptable Islam. But what actually is taking place in the Arab world since the last 2 years is, yes, political Islam, but it is the emergence of Sunni Islam as a new ideology against two things, against the Shia Islam of Iran, which is in power, the format of Iran as a revisionist element in the international and regional system. Secondly, the sort of Sunni Islam that was represented by Salafi or Al-Qaeda sort of organizations, which is very violent and bloody. So I don't think that there is any reason to be worrying of the rise of Sunni Islam as the blossoming flowers of this Arab Spring, if we go back to this improper definition. And we have to see this as a historical phenomenon. We can't escape from this phenomenon. It will hold the ground for a while in this epoch of history. So in that sense, Turkey being a success story economically, being a bridge by that part of the world, the Middle East and Europe, and elsewhere, can provide a sobering example for the rest of the world, because the region itself is the legacy of the defunct Ottoman Empire, whose seat is Turkey. So Turkey more or less will emerge as a regional power, overwhelmingly Sunni country, and having a power as it is at the moment, will be influencing the newly established regimes in the region. So I'll come back to Syria and end, as you asked me, you posed me the question on Syria. But before that, I have to emphasize that the main problem in the region, again, a big question mark, which is brought forward, whether the region is moving towards democracy. It is such a volatile, violent, and messy transition, and ending up in more or less authoritarian regimes, replacing different set of authoritarian regimes. The question comes up into the minds of many people whether this is what we are looking for, democracy, is met by the developments in the region. Well, I think the question again is posed in a different way, a wrong way, actually an outcome of the previous American administration's, previous in the sense of Bush administration, the Republican administration in the United States, emphasizing about the democratization, exporting democracy into the region through occupation, through American armed forces. So what we are witnessing, or what we actually needed in the region and heading to, is not democratization, but it's not a sacrosanct world in our part of the world, because whenever we think of democracy, we always think in mind the Westminster democracy. The Middle East is not apt for an introduction of Westminster democracy in a very short period of time. The real necessity of the region is freedom more than democracy, because of the structure of the regimes that is brought in the wake of the World War I. They are either regimes depending on a sect or a ruling elite very much associated by the Western powers that brought them, and therefore every regime in the region has a problem of legitimacy. Now, through these popular movements in the region, actually what we are moving towards legitimizing, popularizing, and providing the popular basis for the upcoming regimes, upon which then democracy might be introduced. So this is a very long period of time that we have been witnessing. So it is very right to ask, to underline the term transition. The transition will be a very long period, very, very long period. For Syria, now it has become larger than Syria, of course. It's the main theater of every existing contradiction regionally and internationally. It's the theater where Turkey and Iran is confronting each other. It's where Sunni Islam and Shia Islam is facing each other. It's where Iran and the West, the Middle East and the West, the Islamic world and the West, Russia and Russia looking for a new position in the hierarchy of constellation of nations in the post-Soviet period, is facing the Western world led by the United States. So it will take again a lot of time to see how Syria will unfold. Whether it might be dismembered, partitioned, most probably it will. But it will not be confined to Syria, the dismemberment, because the frontiers of Syria was drawn and decided simultaneously with those frontiers of Iraq, with those frontiers of Kuwait, with those frontiers of Jordan and Lebanon and Israel and Saudi Arabia. So if Syria will end up differently from the Syria that were seeing right now on the maps, on the school book maps, then most probably Iraq will not remain the same, nor Kuwait, nor Jordan, nor Lebanon. I don't touch on the issue of Israel and Palestine, which is a very touchy and an uncertain issue. But most probably at the end of this transition, which is part of the title of this panel, we might be seeing drastic changes on the map of the Middle East.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Let us open now the discussion, and who wants to raise the first question? Question here. Ambassador Duna. Can we have a mic, please? Here.
I'm surprised by the surprise of people with regard to the prominence of Islam at the end of this process.
Can you speak louder?
Sure.
Or
What I'm trying to say is that we pretend as if the Islamists had an outlet prior to this development in the form of parliamentary democracy or something like that in these countries. And now we are surprised that Islam is coming to the fore. Well, I mean, it was basically the opposition to these regimes were being formed in the mosque to start with. So it's hardly surprising that they have an Islamic tint at the end of the day. But I would tend to think that it would take a couple of rounds minimum before the democratization or the economic development will take place in these countries because of the remnants of the former regimes in this part of the world.
would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it was only natural that you look at the Muslim Brothers in Egypt. It's been around for 80 years, and they have been in jail, in and out, and persecuted. So when you have elections, there is a lot of sympathy with them. It is true the revolution was not in Egypt an Islamist revolution, which is it was a civil revolution driven by youth, and the Islamists participated in it and played an important role in different stages, the end with the outset of and the ouster of Mubarak. So it's natural what has happened, and it's part of a dynamic. So you look today at someone like Abu al-Futuh, who used to be among the leaders of the Muslim Brothers, who left the Muslim Brothers and takes a thinking that is different. In ways, it overlaps with some of the ideas of the Muslim Brothers, but in other ways, he has an approach to civility and woman and equality and justice and so many other aspects of others that makes him a new brand, a new breed of Islamists. You look at a group, there's a political party that was formed by Muslim Brother youth that more civil, more human rights. You would think it's a liberal group, but they are not. They come from Islamic roots. Also the Muslim Brothers themselves. There is the older ones and there are the young ones. And when you talk to the young, they're more open, they've been around, they've been in association with men and women in Tahrir. So their thinking also could evolve and will evolve differently. So it's a dynamic, and you see that everywhere. I see it among youth in Kuwait. Some of the most organized youth, men and women actually, and some of the most active in bringing about youth movements are those who are products of Islamic Muslim Brothers. They would have spent 10 years, maybe since they were 15, in the Muslim Brothers, and by the time they were 26 or 27, they left it, they opened up more, they have the tradition and the legitimacy, and they are able to deal with, and they're amazing in their capabilities. So it is an era of transformation, an era of awakening, and it's a long transition by which, at the end, I do believe that the essence of the demands is to have a fair system, to have a way by which elites can come and don't stick to the chair for long. Nobody wants a 30-year president sitting on a chair. They want a way to remove leaders and to bring them back based on fair elections and competition and freedom of expression and freedom to criticize. That's at the core. When I talk to the youth, when I interact with them across the region, that's at their mind. And when these youth who are now 25, I'm trying to imagine where will they be when they are 35 and 36. And that's, I would say, the life of the transition.
If you want, let me try to put maybe an additional perspective. In fact, when you look at what happened and where it started in Tunisia and in Egypt, it was not at the beginning a revolution, because in both cases and in other cases, in fact, the characteristic of this uprising is that there was no leader. What happened is that all of us, at building up, the pressure in the pressure cooker became so high that the pressure cooker exploded. When the pressure cooker exploded, the first reaction of the Muslim Brotherhood was to sit and watch, because they didn't initiate the movement and they didn't know what was happening. When they realized that the movement was acquiring this kind of momentum, what we saw was a hijacking of this movement by the Muslim Brotherhood, because they were the only organized force apart from the regime. So they hijacked the movement. And this is why the more quote-unquote liberal people wanted to have elections organized in a longer preparation time so that they could regroup, organize, and stand a chance, which the Muslim Brotherhood didn't want. They wanted election, because they knew that there would be no adversary facing them. In fact, what is happening is that the real story is beginning now, because they have hijacked the uprising, and now the young people, the more secularists, the other groups and forces are saying, hey, wait a minute, we didn't do that so that you take power. And now the real struggle for power in these countries is just beginning. And what is very interesting is that in Tunisia, when you had the leader of the, let's say, the leftist group beginning to acquire this kind of stature, popularity, etc., what happened is that he was killed. He was assassinated 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago. So in a way, we need also to look at what is happening as, let's say, just the beginning of a second round of this story unfolding. The power struggle in these countries has just begun.
And it's about the nature of the state, the civility of
exactly.
the state, the type of a state. And it doesn't mean you end up, again, persecuting the Muslim brothers. No, these expressions of opposition are not calling for the ouster or the change, or they are calling for the civility of the state and different rounds of elections and the rotation of power. So basically, they don't want to go back to the old system.
In fact, what we are saying is that the prize of this power struggle, which is beginning, is the nature of the state.
The nature of the state.
The prize and the stake.
And you could see at a certain time a coup, and then another time the coup has to leave power. And look at Portugal after the beginning of the transition stage in 1974 or so. I mean, it took 2 full years, and that's Portugal. Let aside when we look at Egypt and other places under a lot more economic stress.
Next question. Clyde?
Thank you. So one of you made the point that at the moment Syria is the main theater of the action. And I have to say that I've been having a very difficult time personally understanding who the players in Syria are and who I should be rooting for. And I'd like to ask all of you, but particularly you, Shafeeq, to explain, to clarify the Syrian situation a bit and give us some sense of how you think it might develop and how we would like it to develop.
But also maybe Cengiz, since you are, let's say, close by because of the geography, but who wants to start, Shafeeq or Cengiz?
Okay, I mean, Cengiz.
Both.
Both.
Maybe. And sometimes me and Shafeeq may get lost in the wood. Ambassador Lambah can
Will balance us.
see it much.
Can look at the forest.
Okay. Well, who to bet on Syria? Stay away from Syria. First, I have to warn you. Stay away because it's very, very complicated. Because of the reasons I tried to mention, Syria seems a very peculiar case in where the opposition cannot, through force of arms, remove the regime, and the regime cannot control the territory of Syria. So in chess, what is it called in chess? There is a certain move that it's blocked. Nobody can move. Yes, so it's not mate. What we
example. I remember when we had our meeting in Kuwait 2 days after Mubarak's fall, and the headline of one Kuwaiti newspaper was, "Why not us?" I remember it was the front headline so this question of why not us. So something is going to happen in Saudi Arabia over the next 3-5 years. Will the regime be sophisticated enough and adaptable enough to absorb it? That is a possibility. The other possibility, and it is the case, it has been the case in Syria, if in Syria the soldier had not killed the young people who were writing graffitis on the walls, we would not have maybe the civil war we have now. So my point is, we better be watchful about what is happening in Saudi Arabia, because a lot of these things are happening beneath the surface. The media is not very good at reporting it. So I think this is just, in a way, complementing your caution, if you want.
And when you look at the Arab world, you also realize that, and in line of what you said, Claude, is that it takes an incident, over a volatile situation, and then everything goes up in flames. And that's why the advice now, so if any of you is in a capacity of advice, is do reform now, don't wait long, and make sure these reforms are very substantial. And the most so far in the Arab world who has been able to take a meaningful step forward has been the King of Morocco. All others are still waiting, but waiting is very dangerous during such an era.
Exactly.
But also on what you said about the Shias, and I would like to mention that when the Bassiouni report was written on what happened and the events of Bahrain,
yes,
there was no proof at all that the Iranians were involved in the uprising in Bahrain.
Yes.
Again, when you look at the uprising in Bahrain, it was grassroots. It had to do with justice, equality, elections, and democratization, and had nothing to do directly with Iran. Now, the Iranians use that from a media point of view, but there is no direct influence and no direct association. So in a way, everybody in the Arab world would like to say what is happening at home is something related to somebody outside. But the truth of the matter, much of what is happening at home is, as just mentioned by Mr. Lambah, is that it's really homegrown and relates to serious issues of justice and equality.
So let me now turn to both of you, because I would like you to add your words of wisdom before we conclude the session. Ambassador Lambah first.
Well, I think based on our discussion, what I would say is just make 2 or 3 points. One is that democracy, concepts like democracy, can neither be imported nor exported. So what is important is the domestic considerations. 2, there has to be political engagement with Islam. And 3, the younger generation, which is educated and has means of communication, is going to determine developments in the region in a considerable manner. And 4, the unaffected regions will feel affected, maybe not by the Muslim Brotherhood, but maybe no, but Wahhabism probably yes.
Thank you. Cengiz.
Yes, I come back to what you said earlier in the introduction, that what we will be seeing for a while, we cannot determine for how long, but for a while we will be seeing uncertainty and volatility in the region. But I think, and I'm not alone in thinking as such, that the future prospects of the region are bright, because since decades, masses of people, most importantly, new generations are entering into the scene of history. They are not bystanders anymore. The Arab societies, whatever sect that they belong, or to what religion they belong, They are in the game, in history, and particularly in a region where heroism counts so much. Big names to follow, no more. We remember the big name Nasser, Kemal Atatürk in Turkey, Muhammad Ali in Egypt,
Bourguiba in Tunisia.
Bourguiba in Tunisia, Boumediene in Algeria, whatever. So Yasser Arafat in Palestine. Now nobody knows the name of, international name of Wael Ghanem, who was just a Google operator in Egypt.
Exactly.
And he was in the forefront of the Tahrir demonstration that brought the downfall of a 30-year autocrat whose name was Hosni Mubarak. And while Ghanem is back at his work, at his office now, he's not in a power position, vying for government and so on and so forth. So I think this is a very important phenomenon that somebody in one of the early sessions of this GrowthNet meetings had said that the internet is the greatest equalizer of our time, and it is for the region as well. And with these new instruments, we have to see the future as bright as it is, since millions of new generations are now on the scene of history.
Thank you. Shafeeq, last word.
I mean, just emphasizing this is a generational shift and a generational change. It is a long transition, yet it at the grassroots represents quite a level of engagement and proactivity by peoples of the region not seen in the region for a long time. And so it represents a newcomer and a changer of the entire equation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me, again, not try to summarize because we had a very rich conversation, but let me try to outline a few points. Number one, I think, and you very much expressed that, what we see today, one of the big change is the change of the notion of the Arab street. Remember before, when we spoke about the Arab street, it was this kind of mass of people who could be manipulated and thrown into the street and shout slogans, you know, down with the Americans, down with Israel, and so on and so forth. What we see today is that the Arab street has become a very important actor, but it is in a noble sense of the term. These are people who are not anymore afraid. As you said, the wall of fear has collapsed. I think this is a major revolution. The second point that I would like to make is, and we have not, and it is too bad, we have not spoken enough, one key factor in the coming period will be the economy. I think at the end of the day, whether it is the Muslim Brotherhood or other regimes, the fate of this regime will hang on their ability to deliver some economic improvement. In all these countries, the economy has been going down the drain, unemployment is skyrocketing, standard of living, which were already very low, are going even lower. And the crucial test will be how these regimes, whatever they are, can restore some sense of hope for their population. And here, there is a tremendous sense of urgency that we all need to be aware of, because this will be, at the end of the day, the defining factor on the way the evolution of a region will shape up in the coming years. The third point that I would like to make is that, as we have mentioned, in a way, political Islam has emerged as a major force in the region. I would not say has emerged, has been legitimized as a major force in the region. Whatever the evolution of this second round, what I call the second round of a power struggle, political Islam is here to stay in the region. It will be fragmented into moderates, semi-moderates, extremists, but political Islam is here to stay in the region, and we better learn to live with an institutionalized political Islam with all the shades that this will encompass in the coming years. Fourth point, and I could not agree more with you, Cengiz, what is happening in Iraq goes way beyond the fate of the 22 million Syrians. I think what is happening there faces us with a tremendous new problematic situation that we all know that this is very crucial, but nobody knows how we can have a positive influence on the development of a situation. As you said, there is nobody to bet on for the moment. So this is a very unique situation because we all see the tremendous stakes at play, but nobody can do really anything about it because it is too risky and it is really betting with while being blindfolded. Last point, and it in a way is the logical conclusion, and I get back to the original point when we started, is political uncertainty, volatility, and risk. I think we have to be prepared for that. We have to learn to live with that. And we have, in a way, to be aware that whether as business people, whether as political strategists, contingency planning of all kind is really the order of the day. So I would like you to thank our three brilliant panelists. I think we did the best we could trying to look at a puzzle in a puzzle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claude.
Yeah. We are all continuing without interruption for the closing session of the inaugural meeting of the GrowthNet. So please be seated. Our speakers for the last concluding session are just waiting. Shafeeq, thank you.